Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're really excited to be here. Um, I know where to begin for sure, and I wanted to just give a little setup about what we're going to do tonight. And as you heard, we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So this is about Lori's memoir, and we're going to learn a lot about her and her career in journalism, but also, it's a lot more than just journalism. Um, I've been a good friend of Lori's. She's a broadcast legend, you all know that. Her new book, Being There, a memoir of an Asian American journalist, is hot off the press. It actually just came out today.
Right.
So you are the first to get it. Yes. Tonight we'll try to cover a lot of ground. We'll talk to Lori about her extraordinary journalism career, and of course about this book, which is also about identity, courage, community, and being there when the door hasn't always been open. Most of you know Lori as a trusted journalist who spent decades, 36 years at King 5. Wow, that's amazing, right? Being a steady, reassuring presence during, moments of crisis, change, and historic events. You had our trust.
Right.
Yeah. And I've also had the privilege of knowing her beyond the anchor desk and as a former colleague and now a close friend. And I first knew of Lori when we were both in college at Stanford. Her reputation preceded her. Miss Teenage America from Hawaii, I remember being in awe, right? And yes, all my guy friends wanted to date her.
Where were they?
They were intimidated by you. Years later, our paths crossed again at King TV. Over time, Lori became not just a role model and a trailblazer for me as an Asian American journalist, but a generous mentor to so many young journalists of color. Along the way, we've shared laughter together, Yaya girls trips, right, Yayas?
Yayas.
Yeah. And really lovely conversations about family, culture, and advocacy. And yet, even knowing Lori as I do, I realized that after reading the memoir, there's a lot I don't know about Lori, and so we'll reveal that tonight. I think longtime viewers will see the full humanity behind a very familiar public face. So tonight, I'll invite Lori to read a few short passages from the memoir. We don't want to give everything away, so just a few, okay? And we'll reflect together. And at the end, we'll open things up for questions from the audience, okay? From all of you, so don't be shy. So Lori, thank you for being here.
And thank you, Mimi, for doing this. I know it's kind of awkward because this is something we do. We yak a lot as friends, and yet this is like a totally different setting.
It's
something that we're both not quite used to, but you're going to love it.
We will.
She's an expert. She knows what she's doing.
No, this is all about Lori, and even though she'll say it's not about her, this is about her, and she should be honored. Yes, definitely. Okay, so before we go back to the beginning of your story, Lori, I want to start here. You spent decades telling other people's stories, often setting your own aside. And you titled this memoir, Being There, a memoir of Asian American journalist. What made you decide to write this now? And, why was it important for you to get this out there?
I decided to write the memoir because although it's a memoir, it's not about me. It's about us. We have been, as a generation, through a lot. We have been through the civil rights movement, the voting rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movement, you name it, we've been through it. We've been through all sorts of campaigns, Black power, Asian American power, Hispanic power, Native American power. We have been a generation moving through a very important time. And we deserve to tell this story as best as we can. So I can only tell this story through my eyes, through what I saw, felt, and thought, but it really is our story. And the reason I chose to do it now is because I felt we have a young generation coming up that does not know this story. So I thought, okay, I'm going to just lay it out there and hope that they learn from it, learn from our mistakes, and get inspired by our achievements as a group, as a generation. More specifically, I felt I had a lot to say about the fact that when I started in this business, when we started in this business, when most of us started as young journalists maybe, there weren't that many women, first of all, in the field. There weren't that many women of color in the field. And there certainly weren't many women of color leaders in the field either. We weren't news directors by and large. We weren't producers, executive producers. We weren't making the decisions and calling the shots. So this was an important thing that I wanted the younger generation to learn, that in the beginning it wasn't there, so we had to create our own opportunities, and this is what we did. Lay out a little path, a little journey path, so that they could read about it and follow. So that was the motivation. It's not about me, but it's about us, ultimately.
You know, you told me that the original title of the memoir was Astonished, right? And then, so I want to know why that title, and then how did it change from astonished to being there?
I started with astonished because that's how I felt when I look back at my life. Who would have thought a young girl in Hawaii, parents are public school teachers, so we weren't a very wealthy family or influential or out of the ordinary. Who would have thought that she would, one, become Miss Teenage America? That was very bizarre. Two, go to Stanford University. I didn't even know where it was when I applied. And then three, enter a field that was so rarely considered by Asian Americans in general, right? Asian American families wanted their kids to become doctors, lawyers, or engineers, and if you were a woman, maybe a nurse or a teacher. That was about it. And so to become a journalist was so out of their imaginations that a lot of Asian American kids who wanted to be journalists were discouraged, laughed at, and basically told, no, don't do it. So who would have thought that all the things that happened in my life would lead up to this moment tonight? I'm astonished at everything that happened. So that was my first thought. One of the editors who read the book and the title said, no. So I picked being there because that was another close selection when just a few years ago I was walking around doing a little tour with a young Cambodian-American woman, and I was telling her what I knew about Seattle CID, and she said, she was kind of giggly and shy, and she said, every time you come on TV, my dad yells, everybody, Lori's on TV, come and watch. And I was so astonished that they would do that. I said, why does he do that? She goes, oh, we're just so excited to see an Asian woman on TV. And so that's when it hit me. Oh my gosh, just being there made this family and made this young woman feel happy and excited and hopeful. So that's where being there came from.
Great. We're going to hear more about you being there in various places and moments. But before we go any further, we want to take you all back to the moment that changed your life. In 1973, when Lori won the Miss Teenage America pageant, well, King 5 Evening happened to take a look back at that moment, and we're going to play a little news piece. A little news piece that was done with Lori when she was at King.
Good evening. An Olympia man catches
35 years ago, an unexpected experience launched the broadcasting career of news anchor Lori Matsukawa.
Police in Ferndale tonight are talking to the...
Ask her about the life-changing event today,
Let's do it.
and she just might do a little dance from days gone by.
Woo!
Flashback to 1974, senior year at Hawaiʻi High in Hawaii. 17-year-old Lori plans to study music and become a piano teacher.
I was looking around for money for college, and a friend of mine said, hey, if you enter this Miss Teenage America pageant, you could win a college scholarship. Plus, they don't have a bathing suit competition, so you might even have a chance.
Lori wins the local pageant and heads to Fort Worth, Texas,
The Miss Teenage America pageant.
to join 43 other girls representing cities nationwide.
Lori Matsukawa, Honolulu, Hawaii.
Also competing for the $10,000 scholarship is a student from Rainier Beach High School.
Karen Rain, Seattle, Washington.
Karen and Lori remain friends today, reunited by Miss Teenage America.
That was one of the fun things about the pageant, was learning a dance routine, like you're, on Broadway, and they said, all right, everybody do this and do that.
Yes,
And then,
ring those bells.
You've got to ring them bells. You've got to ring them bells.
We've got to ring this.
that's right, we had to do this. And we had bells on our wrists.
The images from the live telecast may be grainy, but not the memories.
So let's start with the first presentation.
Lori vividly remembers the talent portion of the pageant. Instead of playing the piano like other contestants, she dares to do something different. The Maori Poi ball dance.
And long ago, the Maoris were known to be very fierce warriors.
So that's eventually what I selected as my talent, was the Maori Poi ball dance, because I figured, who's going to do that? Nobody. And I was right. So here's the thing. All week long we're practicing for the pageant. I do the poi balls, no problem. The night of the pageant, in front of millions of viewers, the poi balls collide and stop. And I'm like, uh-oh.
Despite the bobble, Lori advances to the final round of the pageant. Now, nobody expects her to get this far. Not Lori or her parents.
My parents at the time thought, what are the chances that she's going to win? So they decided, oh, we're not going to go because it's too far. So when they would do cutaways of the candidate and the parents, it was hilarious because they'd show me and they'd pan to my chaperone, and she's this Caucasian woman with the blonde, beehive.
Step up here, please.
Even when the judges narrow the 4 finalists down to 2, Lori still can't imagine winning.
No, it never crossed my mind. When there were just the 2 of us, I remember standing there thinking, okay, now when they announce my name as first runner-up, I'm going to jump over and give her a big hug.
Our first alternate is Miss Janet Danes from Loveland, Utah. Ladies and gentlemen.
So that's why when they announced her name as first runner-up, my mouth drops open, my eyes bug out because I didn't expect it.
Lori Matsukawa.
The mouth never closed. And here's when we went to the Kentucky Derby. I rode in these big parades and got to meet Colonel Sanders and got to meet, Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees. Oh, here, this is the only picture I have of me and Sonny Bono. Wow, it's the first time I'm seeing that picture. But after being Miss Teenage America, you travel to every city, you're interviewed by newspaper reporters, radio, television reporters. I began to think, hey, this is a job I could do.
Definitely a job she could do. After using her scholarship money to get a degree from Stanford University, Lori worked her way up to the anchor chair, sitting pretty today, all because of a pageant and a poi ball dance she'll never forget.
So, and then you just kind of hope it stays going until you end the dance.
And some people in this room have actually seen that poi ball dance in person. It's something you'll never forget, right?
Okay, so Lori, that was amazing. You look beautiful. Yeah, your mouth was wide open the whole time.
Agog.
So you were 17 years old,
Yes.
newly crowned Miss Teenage America,
Yes.
and you were in disbelief. And you write in your memoir, "How can this be? I was the ugly duckling, the kid with glasses and braces and knock knees and no boyfriend. How is this happening?" And then, even then, you asked the pageant president, you asked him, you said, "Will I have any problem because I'm Japanese? I mean, I don't look like the usual Miss Teenage America." So I want to know, where did that awareness come from? You're 17, so early on. You know, what did it teach you about visibility and belonging? This is way before journalism.
I thought about that question because all of the Miss Teenage Americas before me, all 12 of them, I was number 13, all 12 of them were Caucasian women, and most of the candidates, I don't know if you had a chance, were Caucasian women, but there were African Americans there was a Latina there were several Asian American candidates as well. And so it was, again, the beginning of change. People were beginning to see all kinds of folks as part of the community, and there was some inclusion even at that contest. But I knew that in my journeys, I was going to be the atypical Miss Teenage America. If the head office ever got complaints or heard bad things, they never let me know. I would like to think that whenever I made an appearance that I was just coming across as a regular old teenager, and the people in the audience would accept me as such. And it felt that way when I went to the television stations or appeared in the newspaper articles. It was very positive coverage. It was very, I think I got a break because I was from Hawaii. Frankly, they didn't see me so much as an Asian person so much as that exotic Hawaiian person. So I did catch a break. I did catch a break there. But I wanted to be sure that if I was causing any trouble that they would let me know. But they never said anything about that.
That's good. Never received any kind of
hate mail or
Yeah.
no.
That's
I was really shocked.
Yeah.
That's another astonishing thing, right? You would think she would get some pushback. The only time I did get hassled for being Japanese was when I was in Japan. I would go to the supermarket, and we were just introducing Dr. Pepper, our sponsor, Dr. Pepper in the markets, and these little kids would be standing there looking up going, rah, rah, and you could tell they were saying, "She's not Miss Teenage America. She's not blonde. She doesn't have blue eyes." Rah, rah. So I had memorized a few Japanese lines like, oh, in Hawaii, I learned hula dance. I didn't go to Japanese language school. And when they heard my Japanese, they knew, oh yeah, she's not Japanese. She's definitely American. So I quashed that right there.
So Lori, when you were in high school, I understand you were very shy. You said you were very, very shy. You actually really started coming into your own in high school. You joined the choir. You joined speech club, speech and debate. You were like award winner, of course. And that helped you step out of your shyness, right?
Yes, because when you don't have a boyfriend, you have a lot of extra time. So so that choir was good because we had practice after school. So filled my time with practicing music, and we did a Polynesian show as well as an American show. And so our Polynesian shows required our choir to perform in Waikiki. So here's our high school choir performing in Waikiki like professional performers. And so that was part of the astonishing, training that I got in high school. How to go to a hotel, set up your show, costume change, right? Music all in a row, organized, set up, tear down, out, and off the stage in 45 minutes. It was terrific training. So if you don't have a boyfriend, it's a great way to occupy some time. And then on weekends, I had a lot of time on weekends, so I joined the speech club because that's when they competed, was on Saturdays. And they had a category called storytelling. they have debate and stuff like that. But I said, storytelling, wow, I can do that. And so that, I think, helped bring me out of my shell too, because to be a storyteller, you can't be shy. You have to be so engrossed and excited about your story that your audience gets excited too. So that was good training. And so in a way, I was very lucky not to have a boyfriend.
It was their loss, for sure. Okay, so high school, though, so you grew to be pretty independent and, more confident. But then we're going to segue into something that happened to you while you were in high school. You were walking home from school, and a stranger grabbed you. And it was only because passersby intervened that you were able to get away. Now, Lori, before we talk about this, I want you to read this excerpt, if you wouldn't mind.
Here we go. Okay. This was when I was in, I want to say 10th grade, so what does that make me? 15, 16 years old. Okay. Every time I relive this scary time in my mind, I thank God for putting that soldier and his wife right there, right then. But I also feel a simmering rage. I know this experience has skewed my attitude towards sex. Men just want to have sex, rape people. They are animals. I never sought counseling for this trauma. Like a good Japanese girl, I kept it to myself because of haji, the shame it would bring to me and my family. Maybe it was my fault. Should I have walked a different route? Why didn't I scream louder and put up a fight? Now, I know it was not my fault that I became a victim. As I got older, I went on dates, but never had a serious boyfriend because I knew what was coming, a sex act, wanted or not. Only after positive relationships with kind and gentle men over several years did I feel safe enough to enjoy lovemaking. Today, I applaud women who have the courage to call out the brutes still among us. These women reject being called a victim. They are survivors. Brava.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lori. I know it was really hard. And I think especially during this time, I think women have become more brave and being able to speak out. And I mean, what would you like to tell, I guess, young women and young girls, about what you went through and what you hope they learn from it?
Boy, all I can say is that you have to not blame yourself if you become a person who is attacked, assaulted, even if it doesn't go on to become a sexual assault. It could have very well become one, because the police later told me that there was a buddy of this guy waiting in the garage down the street there, and who knows what would have happened with 2 versus 1, right? And so I would tell women to put up a fight, scream, yell, take self-defense classes. And if it is something that you cannot be prevented and you do get assaulted, to not feel it's your fault, because it's not. It's not your fault. And to the men and even other bystanders out there, please don't hesitate to be an advocate or a rescuer or a hero like this soldier was. He was just driving down the street with his wife, and he could see us, in this tussle, and I'm thinking, oh my God, can't you see my purse and my books are scattered on the ground, and I'm tugging with this guy, and so he stopped. And thank goodness this soldier stopped. And his wife saw him roll down the window, and he goes, "Hey, what's going on?" And the assaulter said, "Oh, this is nothing. This is my girlfriend. We're just having a fight." And today that would not be acceptable. We're just having a fight. But back then, right? And the soldier opened his door and said, "Hey, you just let her go." And so he did. He let go, and he scooted away. And then his wife said, honey, you come sit in this car and you wait. So they called the police. So defend yourself if you find yourself being assaulted, and if you see an assault happening, get involved. Don't just stand by and say, oh, someone else will do it, because you might be the only person there. You might be the only person that will stop something very, very dangerous.
Something you mentioned too was haji, right?
Yes.
And shame, and how it kept you silent. And I think for many Japanese Americans, haji is something you're taught to carry if you want to be seen as like a good Japanese American, you know. And I know that played a role in your life, right?
It does, and I don't know if other people can relate to this. It's probably most common in Japanese American families, but other Asian cultures too have this do not bring shame to your family idea. And so you don't say anything or do anything that will bring shame and dishonor to your family. So say you have a brother who has an addiction. You don't talk about it, not even to your own other family members, about addiction. You don't talk about needing help, seeking help, because that would only bring shame to the family name. And so haji is a very destructive thing in that way. On the other hand, haji can also be a positive thing because it keeps you in line. And I think that's what many of the parents were trying to do, especially the first generation immigrant parents. They're trying to keep their kids in line and threatening their kids and saying, don't you cause our family any shame. And so Asian kids tended to be very well behaved, which could have been good, which could have been bad, but has, you know, both that good and bad element to it.
I think you mentioned that your mom was, you know, haji was part of her thing.
Oh, she was really into haji. You just don't mention, you don't say anything, you don't bring shame to your family, and it's too bad. I think today there's a lot more openness. People are willing to talk about relatives who go to jail, for example, relatives who get pregnant, you know, before they get married. Those kind of things were not discussed before because of haji, but now there's just more openness, and it's just a lot better for people's mental health in general. I really am glad that we're moving away from that strict Japanese old school haji. Yeah.
Okay, Lori, let's move on and let's talk about journalism,
Okay.
Power, mentorship, and responsibility. So early in your career, you, right out of Stanford, you got your first job in lovely Redding, California. Small market, big lessons, right? That's every young journalist, that's how you start out, is a very small market and work your way up. It was also very personally significant because that's where you met Larry, your husband.
Yes,
And
Larry, where are you? There you are. He was a director in Reading, and I was applying for a reporter anchor position, and he was the one in the booth when I did my audition. So I'm doing my audition. Oh, I stumbled on a word. And so Larry tells me later, oh, I didn't think you were going to get the job.
Did you really say that?
So I was really surprised when you showed up later and started working at the station. And so that was the beginning of our 3-city romance. We worked together in Reading, and then I got a job in Portland, Oregon. He got a job in Portland, Oregon, and then we moved up to Seattle, which is actually where Larry was raised. So we ended up in this beautiful city, and we said, okay, 3rd city, it's about time we get married. So that's how that
And how long have you been married?
This year, it's going to be 44 years.
Yay.
44. And you'll read more about the book because it wasn't exactly, you know, the paradise flower-strewn path to romance that, you know, remember Mom and
your
Dad
mom.
and Haji and all
Haji.
that? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Psh.
yeah.
Okay, that's another story, but you can read it in the book.
Okay, so you ended up at King. You were at Como for
Yeah,
a couple
for-
years.
yeah.
You ended up at King for 36 years. You covered so many things, right? And we'll get into sort of what was one of the most important issues that you covered, and your legacy there. But you know, I know you became one of the main anchors. You traveled a lot, but you also talk about a time when you were, I think, passed over for a main anchor role.
You would think, okay, this is important because when I first came to this city, this market, it was in 1980, Mount St. Helens, right? That was my first big story was, oh, here, I'm working the weekend shift. Oh my God, there's a volcano exploding. So the weekend shift isn't always bad. But even in 1980, it was still, I would say, a pretty white market, television market. They were still mostly white men on the anchor and sports desks and weathermen. And there were the, one white woman with all the men on the news desk. So it was, and the reporting staff was largely Caucasian. And so it was not really representative of the city because the city, the region, was very diverse in my mind. And so it was important, I thought, that we, get the colors in there. And we started the third chapter of the Asian American Journalists in 1983. And so it was basically to start a pipeline because I said, a lot of young people would become journalists if they knew it was a possibility. So we have to tell them to go to college, stay in college, study journalism, and then we have to find them jobs and then get them promoted to better jobs and get this pipeline going. And so that was kind of our mission it's been 40 years now since we've started Asian American Journalists Association, AAJA. And in that time, I have to say that not just this market, but markets across the country have become so much more diverse. So we have achieved a lot, to the point where we have to remind young Asian American journalists in the field today, hey, it wasn't always this way. We were so isolated and so alone in the very beginning. And so Asian American journalists in print, in magazines, on the radio, in broadcast, we banded together and formed this chain. And we started pulling each other up this chain with the goal of becoming decision makers, right? We wanted that corner office. We wanted to see Asian American CEOs, news directors, executive producers, and now we're seeing a lot more, diversity on the news sets too.
So sort of getting back to when you were maybe passed over, do you think it had something to do with the fact that you were Asian American?
It might have. I decided that I would just take it as a hard knock because I was replaced. I had a weeknight. It was a victory for me. I was named the weeknight 11 o'clock anchor at King, and the first time they ever had a woman of color, taking that position. So I was very happy. We had a change of news directors, and all of a sudden, I was called into the news director's office and told I was no longer going to be the anchor at 11 on King, but I would be the anchor at 10 o'clock on Kong. And I said, oh, when are you going to tell everybody else? He says, oh, in about 10 minutes when we have our staff meeting. So it was a decision that had been made. No one knew it was coming, and I certainly didn't know it was coming. And boom, it happened. And it was such a shock. I think everybody in the newsroom was surprised. I was surprised. The media started calling. John Levesque at the Seattle Times was like calling, saying, hey, what did I hear about this? And it was just, chaos. And my mind was blown. I was saying, why? Why is this happening to me? And at that time, I'd been working decades at King. I'd been working, at least 15 years at King. So
and the community really really came out.
And the
actually.
community was
They
shocked.
wrote in, they called.
They wrote letters to the editor, they wrote letters to King. I was so amazed that there was this reaction from all kinds of folks. So I still didn't get the job back. I considered maybe I should do a lawsuit, but I didn't think I would be successful. I couldn't prove beyond a doubt that it was because I was Asian that I lost the job. So I said, okay, I'm just going to stick around because I have to be there. I can make a difference by just being there and sticking around on Kong and making that newscast more successful. And it sounds Pollyanna-ish, I know, but you know, I'd be better off sticking with this station than not. So I just kind of stuck it out. 2 years later, this anchor woman that had been in my place left to do something else. And so they said, okay, we're going to do a nationwide search for her replacement. And so I applied, and I had to audition with Dennis Bounds again. I had to, I'd only been anchoring with him for 10 years. Okay, I'll audition with Dennis. And they said, well, can you, now that she's gone, can you fill in for her until we finish this search? So I said, sure, I'll fill in. And then I stayed in that anchor chair for the next 13 years. It was kind of nuts. I didn't, it was like, okay, I'll stay here. So,
Wow.
So being there makes a difference. I was so convinced that being there mattered. I just stayed there, and it ended up okay. It ended up okay.
And I also want to mention that she does write in the book, which I think is a little funny, that when there was a lot of sort of outrage in the community, I think they thought that Lori was the one who instigated it, which she didn't. It was just a natural thing from the community.
They erupted, and the news director said, call them off. Like, call off the dogs or something like that. I said, what? Call off who? He said, I know you told them to write letters. I said, no, I didn't. And I was thinking, but I should have. Yeah. Why didn't I think of that?
Well, Lori, you mentioned Dennis Bounds. Mm-hmm. So you were a longtime co-anchor with Dennis. Mm-hmm. He was awesome. And when you left King, or close to when you were leaving King, at King they offered a buyout, right? Mm-hmm. And they offered you and Dennis, but only one of you, because you were anchors, could take the buyout. Mm-hmm. But because you had seniority, you had first dibs, right, to take the buyout. But you decided not to. And Dennis was very happy to take it, right?
Right.
But tell us why, because you said you had one important series story to tell before you retired.
I did. I had started working on a project with photographer Dave Wyke on the ultimate, what I considered the ultimate incarceration series for King 5's archive library. I said, we have to have the definitive story of Japanese American incarceration, what happened. Part 2, what happened after they came back from camp and what they faced, including the redress movement. Part 3, the little-told story of the conflict between families, of the people who were incarcerated, who volunteered to fight in the military, versus the people who resisted the draft and protested and had to serve time in prison for that. And then we did a story on how do we continue telling the story and remembering the story. And I did a whole series of, covered a lot of art and storytelling methods that were being used to tell the story, including Buto dance, spoken word, opera, story, just children's books, right? All kinds of ways of telling and retelling the story so no one would forget the lessons. So I said, I have to do this project because so many people who had survived incarceration were beginning to die off. I would clip these obituaries every Sunday, and by the time I was done with the series, I had a whole manila folder full of hundreds of obituaries, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to tell their story. Now. So I said, I have no time to retire. Dennis, you retire, and Dave and I are going to finish this series.
And what was great about that series, Lori won her first Emmy with that series. Yes. And they still, at King, they still refer to that series and go back and
It's still used as an archival tape.
They still use it, so that is an incredible legacy you have left King and all of us, for sure. You know, one of the things I loved about your memoir was that you're not afraid to name people who had a huge impact in your life, including local heroes who were really courageous during the civil rights movement, community work. And I also want to mention that Lori, you know, in everything that she did, she founded AAJA, the Asian American Journalists Association, and it was so important to have her as a mentor to so many young journalists. But also, she was one of the co-founders of the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Washington. So she did all this when she was still working at King. I don't know how she did it. But
exhausted all the time.
yeah, but I mean, these were so important to you. This keeping your culture and mentoring young people. And I know that there have been some very influential women in your life. Could you name maybe a couple that have had a huge impact on your life?
Well, I have to say, as set as she was in her ways, I have to say my mom was pretty influential. Haji and all, she was pretty influential, and she really, fought for what she believed. And I think that spirit, that spunk, was part of what kind of rubbed off on me. I was inspired, too, by a woman. She's not a local woman, but she eventually, she was the founder of the Japanese American National Museum. Her name is Irene Hirano Inoue. She eventually married the late Senator Inoue. And she was a quiet, behind-the-scenes person, and that's kind of what I admired about her, and I tried to emulate. It's like, she did so much to help people, and she didn't care that she didn't get the credit necessarily. You know, she was on several boards, influential ones, Casey Family, Carnegie, these mega boards. She even took, was credited with saving the city of Detroit from selling its artwork in its art museum, and by rallying, corporate foundations to save Detroit. And I said, people don't mention Irene as saving Detroit, but she didn't care. She says, so long as they don't have to sell that art collection to pay, for their union members, that's fine. So I think Irene was really influential. Not taking credit, not being worried about who gets the credit, just get the job done. I think that's an important lesson, too.
Yeah, I want to maybe pause a little here and invite any questions that you might have for Lori. I know that I'll take a look at the iPad here, but also if you wanted to come up to the microphone, I think it's
over here.
Is it this way? I can't see.
Yep.
Is it this way?
Yeah, turn up the light so we can see.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions of Lori. But I'll just start it off first. I wanted to know, of everything you've covered, Mount St. Helens, I think even you went to New York, you went to Japan, covering the earthquake, tsunami. What maybe had the most impact on you, the biggest impact?
I think my most exciting and eye-opening story was when we followed Gary Locke to his first trade mission to China. This was a story that I pitched, and we got to go, and it was the hardest I had ever worked in my life. And again, my hero, Dave Wyke, was my videographer on that shoot, too. We were working 13-hour, 15-hour days following Gary around. His first day there, he decided to go on the Great Wall of China, scoot up the stairs, and fly a kite. So here we are, or Dave and I are trying to follow him up these stairs. And if you've ever seen those stairs, they're like really large stairs. They're not little steps. They're like, 3 feet high, like for horses or something. And so I'm trying to chase him. I'm carrying this wooden tripod, and we're trying to chase after the governor. And I said, oh, forget it. This is just too much. I'm going to wait, and we're going to get him on his way down. So we're sitting there on the Great Wall of China waiting for the governor, and all of a sudden, I start feeling really lightheaded. And I must have passed out because I open my eyes and I hear someone saying, is she okay? Does she need water? And my photographer, Dave, said, oh, he said, Mats, you scared me to death because you just kind of sank off the wall and into the floor. And he said, if you had gone the opposite direction, if you had gone back instead of forward, you would have fallen down 30 feet down the Great Wall of China. So I said, well, thank you for stopping me from falling off the Great Wall of China. And then, and then here comes the governor. Okay, so you have to get up and start chasing after him to do the interview. So we had some words with the governor. Don't do that. We're trying to cover your trip, so don't run away. So I think we got to an understanding. And the rest of the trip was pretty good. The rest of the trip, we got good coverage.
Do you have any questions here? Don't be shy, everyone. Huh?
All right, I won't be shy, but I will say I was one of the producers at King TV for many, many years. And working with Lori, I will always say that probably of all the on-air talent, you could have breaking news and you'd say to Lori, we have 10 minutes, so she'd be like, I'm on this, right? And you didn't have to think about it again. You could go live on air and go to Lori, and she would have the absolute latest, given 10 minutes or 2 hours, just the best. And so working with Lori was a pleasure. She was one of the most solid people I've ever worked with. Never failed, ever.
Oh, thanks, Diane. Thanks, Diane. That's so nice. And now I can see some of you.
I
I
know.
can
You
see
have a lot of King 5 colleagues
and I hear
here.
the King 5 folks.
Mimi Gan, hi.
Hey, hi.
Mike
And look at
James.
Mike James, Mike and Donna James
Yeah.
right there. I anchored with Mike James, too, and it was a pleasure, Mike.
Oh, same here.
So here's the deal. Another reason I had to write this book is there are people going into the business who have never known that there was a time where we used typewriters in the newsroom, that we used 5-ply carbon paper scripts, that we didn't have cell phones. So how do we talk to the base? We used a radio. And who remembers the King 5 radio numbers? Anybody? Anybody? KSV 48. Yes. KSV 485.
Right,
And then,
Sky King.
yeah, and then you have to say your unit number, which is your car number. Unit 2 was a crew, right? Unit 2, and then Unit 10, right? KSV 483. And you had to kind of call in your stories sometimes using a payphone at the King County Courthouse. And you had to wait in line until the guy from Cairo finished his. And it was like, really? Really? That was really bad. That was really bad. Yes, we have a question.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, Barb.
Hi. So great to see you. I don't know that all of you know that besides being her contributions to journalism, Lori has just been a champion of the Japanese American, Asian American community in Seattle. So I want to thank you for that, but I do have a question, and it has to do with the model minority myth, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm wondering what you think about it and how you feel it either helped you or hindered you in your career.
That's a terrific question. I think it hindered myself. I hindered myself with this model minority myth. And it kind of goes back to that Haji thing, too. don't bring shame to your family. Don't do anything that would, make you stand out, stick up, right? Be obnoxious. So I did kind of try to be the good Japanese girl and not cause trouble and not make waves. And I thought by being nice and by being, pleasant and good, it would get me far in journalism. No. In this business, you really have to be aggressive and you have to toot your own horn. You can't just expect people to notice, hey, there's a good hardworking person. It doesn't happen that way. So I think by kind of absorbing my model minority myth in my own head, I was my own worst enemy at times. Yeah, I had to outgrow that.
So what do you think about journalism now? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse since you were in it?
Oh, in many ways, the journalism has gotten better because the technology allows them to go into scenes that we didn't go into before. We can go into courtrooms now that we didn't go into before. We could go into jails. We can use smaller, less obtrusive technology to cover events. I think people, because of the need for speed, sometimes there's a lot of context and history that's lost. And so my hope is that we focus on context and reason and tell people why this is an important story. I think that's lacking in today's fast-moving, very short soundbite, limited news coverage. So generally, I think the news coverage is okay, but it could be a lot better. And it's very scary that it's being attacked by an administration that doesn't seem to value this fourth estate. And I fear for the fate of the fourth estate in the U.S. Supreme Court. We have seen the U.S. Supreme Court with the whole incarceration of Japanese Americans thing, that they make mistakes, that they are not, infallible, and I just don't want to see a repetition of that, a repeat of that today. Just absolutely not, and I'm fearful. I'm fearful for the fourth estate today. Hi.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I was going to comment on the very same thing and ask you to say some more about the First Amendment issues with journalism these days, particularly vis-a-vis our administration. Thank you.
I can't speak for all journalists, but I am afraid for our future. I think we need to all stand up and protect our local, for example, we all have to stand up and protect our local news, whether it's our community papers, whether it's the Seattle Times, whether it's, right, KUOW, right? We have to be prepared to stand up and protect our local journalism because journalism and news is local. No, the New York Times cannot cover Seattle, King County, Pierce County. They cannot cover the state of Washington like local news. So we have to protect, defend, subscribe to our local news first. And then subscribe to national news or regional news coverage and speak out in defense of journalists because they have an important job. They are sometimes the only ones you can, really hope to get a smattering of information from that is mostly true. It's hard because they are kind of left looking for reliable sources which may or may not be there. So support your local media in any way, shape, or form that you can, and stand up for journalists. Stand up for them. Get them into the places they need to be. Yeah.
Lori, on that note, I wanted to ask you, because as a journalist, you always had to pretty much remain unbiased, right? And really couldn't advocate for certain issues and things. So how did you sort of maintain that balance? And also, what is it like now being outside of journalism and being able to actually, freely protest if you want, be an advocate for various issues.
I think when I was at King, I had a bit of license. There was something called the Minority Report Beat. And so that was reporting on anything that happened in communities of color. And for the longest time, there were a few of us reporters of color in the King newsroom that were fiercely against being pigeonholed as the minority affairs reporter. We didn't want to be labeled with that. We don't want to be sent out to the Cinco de Mayo celebration every year. We didn't want to be the ones sent out to, the Bonadori every July in Seattle. But I realized that at some point, if we didn't cover it, it wouldn't get covered at all, which is even worse. So I said, okay, if they want me to cover minority communities, I'm going to cover them. So I began covering all of the communities. If it was, African American business days, I was out there. And if it was Latino, Cinco de Mayo, and if it was Native American salmon days, every ethnic group became my ethnic group. And because if I didn't cover it, nobody else was going to cover it. And it gave me a little license to kind of be out there. And so you end up putting these communities of color and their issues out there. And I didn't get pushback. I don't know how that came to be. I don't know. People who were closer to the administration maybe would know. I don't know what the news honchos at King thought, but I was going to cover it. And so that's why we covered the incarceration stuff so much, because they didn't say anything, so I just kept covering it.
It's great. Be bold. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions. Are there any more? I just want to put it out there just to see. Oh, here, we've got one more.
There's so much that younger generations don't seem to, now I said old, don't seem to get their news from the local news, from reading the paper, much more on the internet and social media. And do you think that it's best to somehow engage with that medium, or how do you overcome that? How do we get younger people to actually watch the news, read the news, or get reliable information?
You can't tell them what to do. What is your thought on that? I don't know. I don't think I could tell any young person what to do or how to consume news.
No, I don't think you can tell people, but I guess that's part of my question is then how does the mainstream media then engage with that, or transfer onto web-based media, right? I don't think you're going to get people away from social media or from X or all of those other little snippets of news, but how do you get yourself out into that lane?
One thing that I found helpful, especially since I've been retired, and this leads to your question about, you're a lot more free. I'm a lot more free to, express my opinion and get active in various community events because I'm no longer representing a station or a company, and I'm no longer working as a journalist. I'm not wearing a journalist hat. I'm just a citizen with an opinion. And so what I find important is being an advocate and having a point of view and being willing to share that knowledge with journalists, saying, hey, if you want to do a story about, I know Barb is very involved in efforts to track ICE and immigration arrests and deportations out of King County Airport. So if you want to cover stories about deportation flights out of King County Airport, I know an organization that does that. And I find a certain amount of value being a liaison between groups and media. So maybe that's all I can do at this point, but I think that's helpful. People will call you up and say, hey, Lori, who do we call about XYZ? So there's value in being maybe a liaison or a bridge between groups that have a point of view and media, and have the media decide, is this a group that I want to talk to or not? So maybe a liaison, because you can't tell young people stop reading it on the internet. They're going to, that's how they get their news. That's how they get their news, so.
So Lori, as we're wrapping things up, besides writing a book and writing a children's book too, so you all know about her children's book, right? One more question. Sorry, I didn't see you there. Go
Hi,
ahead.
thank you. So I did a lot of advocacy for a couple decades, trying to get national news to be more diverse. And since Connie Chung, we really haven't had Asian Americans at the top of the as national anchors. And we also haven't had that many who make it to producer levels. And I came to learn that the producers controlled so much about who got to tell what stories and what the stories were going to be. What is your thinking about why it's been so hard for Asian Americans to really crack that particular glass ceiling?
Well, I don't know. What I look to the producers out in the crowd. Why do you think there aren't that many? You're a producer.
I don't know. I really can't answer that.
Thinking of the news directors and producers of color that I know, I'm thinking of Janice Jin and all those people. They have to have a lot of fire in the belly. And so initially, a lot of us, okay, Haji, all this model minority, we were kind of saddled with things, so we weren't able to have that fire in the belly and just say, to hell with this, I'm going to become a news director, producer, CEO or whatever. So there are individuals who have that fire in the belly, and because they're behind the scenes, you don't see them, but they are there. And we just have to make sure that as an organization, for example, AAJA is out there promoting them. When we promote them at our conventions, we promote them among organizations like the New York Times, like CNN, and they're there. It's just that maybe the general public doesn't hear their names because producers, they work hard, they make the decisions, they do a lot to determine what you see, but they're not the ones that get the credit. But they're there, and we just have to continue to encourage them. And that's why these young people are getting all their news on the internet. We can't just say, oh, you're worthless. They're not. They are communicators. They're communicating. We just have to make sure that they have the context, the wisdom, the collective knowledge that we all kind of hold. And we keep this connection, and we help advocate for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Critical thinking as well. Anyone else? Do we have any more questions? One more here.
As you look back your career, like everybody else, we
I'm so sorry, my friend. Can I have you come up to this microphone just so it's easier for everybody to hear? We also have a recording running for the audio.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're totally fine. Don't worry about it.
As you look back at your career, I think like everybody else, we have some regrets. So I was wondering, what would you say situation that you've encountered that you wish you could have a do-over? I'll be curious about that.
I don't know. The biggest decision I ever made in my career was whether to go to the network or stay in Seattle, right? Because it was everybody's dream at the time. I'm going to go work for the network, right? Everybody wants to go to that big job. And I sometimes wonder if did I blow it when I chose to stay here instead of go to work in LA for NBC? But it's only a wonder. It's not a regret, and I don't want to do over. I think I made the right decision for me, but I really am curious, what would have happened if I had gone to LA? Our family, that would have been,
Yeah, I think you mentioned that you did have that opportunity to go
Right.
to LA, but because of your family,
Right.
Larry, a new son, right? Those all came into play. And then also you ended up doing big stories that where, I think she used to think, oh, Lori Matsukawa, NBC News, right?
Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
That was my big dream, Tokyo, or Russia, Soviet, Moscow. But so then I give up this NBC job because knowing NBC, I probably would have ended up being Lori Matsukawa, NBC News, Portland, Oregon. Right? Because your whole the whole West Coast is now your beat. So on any given day, you'd be in Ellensburg, or you'd be in, Yuma City, Arizona. So after I said, no, I'm going to stay at King, then King starts sending me to Japan and El Salvador and, China. And I'm going like, wow, okay, this is good. So again, astonishing, isn't it? Isn't it astonishing? So that's why I had to write it down. It's like so astonishing. But I did want the young people today to know, Mike James, that there was a time when, yes, we used typewriters and 5-ply carbon script paper. So thanks so much. And if you do buy the book, please be merciful, because I'm not really an author. I'm just basically a journalist scribe. I'm just describing through my eyes what we all went through. A tremendous amount of change, technologically, socially, and in the industry too, and among the genders and everything.
Great. We have another question.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question is, what are your thoughts about, we've talked a little bit about, the different media channels that people are getting their news from now. What are your thoughts about people who've been in network, in print journalism, web journalism, striking out on their own and becoming independent journalists, and all that as a trend? Because now people are following personalities without having the backing of an organization. So what are your thoughts about that as the trend in journalism and news?
I hope that they will continue to be truth tellers first and foremost. If they are truth tellers as well as storytellers, we need them. We need this fourth estate to keep our country balanced, our democracy safe, our democracy protected. We need an informed public. I'm hoping that they will, through media, keep people engaged somehow. And if it's on the internet, so be it. I mean, our own son gets all of his news on the internet, but hopefully there are reputable sources of news on the internet. And there are reputable sources, so, let's keep them all informed. Let's keep them engaged. The worst would be to not engage at all. That would be the worst.
And I think donating and supporting independent journalism like NPR, right? There's the 19th, which is a women-run independent journalism organization. And, shout out to Connie Balmer, who
Yes.
stepped up,
That's right.
to support NPR. So I think we just need to keep supporting these independent journalists. So Lori, this has been really amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for bringing so much, I guess, joy and creativity too, as well as your just being such an incredible role model, really, for all of us. And kindness and courage and community are so important to you. And I do have one last gift for you.
I love gifts.
That may bring this full circle. So I want you to open it.
Oh my goodness. It says Mauna Kea on it. Oh no! Are you ready?
Come on, Lori. You still got it in you? Do you still have it in you? Come on.
No.
No, just a little bit. Come on, just
Should
a
I
little
do
bit.
it?
Yes.
Mimi. Oh my gosh.
I knew you'd hate me for it.
This is crazy. Okay, true story. I actually made a pair of poi balls for the Obama girls when they were much younger, when they were still in the White House.
Okay.
And I got a thank you letter from Michelle.
Oh.